千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Previously, we covered chapter 50 line by line. Not only that, but we also discussed the Chinese title of the chapter. Every title in the Tao Te Ching has a specific title. This is not standardized. There's wide agreement on the vast majority of them, but not every single one. For this one, though, it is consistent across the board. There's a Chinese title for this chapter, and it is, as you see here in this slide, as I mentioned last time, it is the chapter of life and death. The Chinese characters that you see there are quite simplistic, very common. The first character is life. The second character there is death, and the final character is chapter. So literally, if you string them together, it says life, death, chapter. The life and death chapter. Now, as we talked about last time, in the Tao, physical death is not seen as the end. Rather, in the Tao, the end is also the beginning. So death is about renewal rather than termination. It is about the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next cycle. And we see this all the time. The ancient sages did not just think about this in terms of wishful thinking. Rather, it was based on their observation of nature. They noted, for instance, that in nature, animals dead and buried provide nutrients, giving plants new life. Plant growth, in turn, provide sustenance to newborn animals, and the cycle continues on. Therefore, as we have gone through a year that was full of reminders of beginnings and ends, the meaning to us is not doom and gloom. Rather, the meaning, especially appropriate now, is that it's all about new beginnings. So here we are, together with one another in a new beginning. Now, when we look at this idea of the end and beginning, etc., particularly in setting a time to mark it as the beginning, I think we can go another level deeper and then see that it doesn't have to apply to a particular time, a particular year, a particular day. Rather, the beginning can apply to any moment. It can apply to the here and now. So no matter when you listen to this presentation, whether right now or in a recording, if you bring your present moment awareness into this instant, right here and right now, you can see that it is just like every other instant. It can be a brand new beginning as we speak. It just depends on how you see it through the eyes of the Tao. So then let's go deeper into what we talked about before in chapter 50. What we did as ever was that we started with a sectional analysis. So I'll skip the details and go to the conclusion What we did was that we marked out all the repeating elements in the Chinese characters from one line to the next. And as you can see here, with the big enclosing red lines, we've also identified the key questions. And this makes it clear that the original structure of this chapter of the Tao Te Ching was divided into two halves. There's a bunch of statements in the first half, followed by a question, and then the final line of the first half is the answer. So the last two lines become why and because. And then we look at the second half, we see the exact same structure toward the end, the same question, why, and then a different answer, because, to the conclusion. So then, with these questions and answers, what exactly were the questions and what was the meaning of the answers? Let's do a quick recap. We got to the very end of chapter 50, so we can talk about the entire chapter as a whole. We started out talking about this idea of cycling through life and death. So this is the symbology that I used last time, where I have the realm of the Tao to the left, and then the material world to the right. So the idea is that we all know about our physical bodies, the molecules that make up individual human bodies are endlessly recycled from nature. There's a part of you that used to belong to another living thing a long time ago, and as you transition away from the material world, your component molecules will go on to be part of other living and non-living things down the road. So the physical body itself, the components thereof, are endlessly recycled. Then the idea is that the true self, the consciousness that inhabits individual physical entities, individual physical vessels, if you will, those also go through a cycling process. As the sixth patriarch of Zen Buddhism, Huineng, has said, this self-nature, the soul, if you prefer, it is not created or destroyed. It is not born, nor does it die. It simply is, and it makes transitions. In the Tao, we say that we all come from the Tao, and we ultimately must return to it. The physical body itself is transient, it will expire. The spiritual self is eternal, it will always exist. So your current form, the form that you're using now to listen to this, the form manifesting at this moment in this world, it is only a small part of your eternal voyage. So the truth about this great circle of the Tao, depicted here in graphical form, this is left to the individual to contemplate. You have to grasp the meaning of this for yourself. You have to figure it out on your own. The best that the Tao can do, the best that teachers can do and sages, is to point the way. Then you have to walk the path. So in this particular chapter, what Lao Tzu did was that he pointed to people. He focused on the right-hand side of this diagram, where I have a symbol there, the silhouettes of people. He looked at all the people, and then he said that, well, I can divide them up into overall categories. Specifically, he had three categories in mind. The first two seem relatively simple the followers of life and the followers of death. Then there's a category that he called those whose lives are moved toward death. Then there's a final category which takes up the second half of the chapter, and it's all about those who are good at cultivating life. So for all the categories, for most of the categories, the first three, he was explicit in saying that, well, roughly there are 3 out of 10 in each group. He doesn't say that for the last group, and that has led to some confusion, mistranslation, misconception, in that when Lao Tzu said 3 out of 10, there's plenty of people who think it means 1/3. Now, if the first 3 groups are 1/3 each, then the 3 groups together cover 100% of humanity. That is not the case. In fact, the first 3 groups, as we described last time, those are the people, 9 out of 10, that don't actually touch the Tao. They're not congruent with the Tao. Another possible confusion is the first category, the followers of life. There's plenty of people who mistakenly think that followers of life, that must be the cultivators of the Tao. That must be the best group. Who doesn't want to be a follower of life instead of a follower of death? A misconception among many students. As we talked about last time, and this next slide makes it easier to see, the first 3 groups are all featuring fear as a primary element. And let me explain. When we talk about the followers of life and followers of death, it is easy to see that death, the fear of death, plays a huge role in the first 2 groups. The followers of life and followers of death are both reactions to an explicit fear of death. Followers of life fear death, and therefore they seek to live a life of safety, of security. They don't try to do anything. So that is why the description here says fearful, holding on, literally holding on for dear life. Those are the followers of life. So that is actually too cautious. The other extreme end of the reaction against the fear of death is to constantly challenge it, to try to prove that you are above it. You fear it, and therefore you want to prove that you do not. It's sort of a paradox of human existence. But we see this all the time. We see people who take excessive risks, and for no other reason than that fear plays a huge role in their lives, even if it's not consciously aware or articulated. They challenge that fear again and again by taking risks. They're trying to prove that they can rise above it. Sooner or later, though, the risk catches up to them, and followers of death then become dead themselves. They become in death, not just following death. So fear, it is easily seen, can be part of the first 2 groups. But what about the 3rd group? Those whose lives are moved toward death. The description here is misguided, much effort directed at the wrong pursuit, which is overindulgence. So now that I bring up fear, you can see that fear is a major element in their thinking as well. The idea is that they don't really know about the great circle of life and death in the Tao perspective. So for all that they are aware of, it may be this existence, this life here and now, this may be the one and only chance, and therefore they have to go out and absolutely go bonkers in enjoying all the delights that, all the pleasures that material life has to offer, hence overindulgence. So at the heart of it, the misguided nature of the third category, there is also a fear there. What if this is it? What if I don't get a chance to enjoy life ever again? I'm going to get my money's worth, so to speak. So just as the first and the second category, and in the second category, we say that it is tragic because dying too soon with so much just thrown away, fear-driven, just like the first category. So all three categories, it can be seen, have fear as an essential element. So the very final category, the 1% out of 10, that is the freedom from fear. That is the liberty, liberated spiritually from the fear of death. Hence the Tao, real understanding. In the chapter, in chapter 50, when Lao Tzu gets to the very final line in describing the final category, he says specifically in the last line, why? Because they have no place for death. So to have no place for death is just another way to say that fear of death does not take up space in their thinking, in their mind. It doesn't take up mental space, mental real estate. So the slide that you see here from last time is reiterating the first three categories. As you can see here, the first one, we talked about the overly cautious. They do not understand the opportunity of life, and therefore they shrink back, they withdraw, they retreat into safety. They don't understand what an opportunity it is. They fear the approaching death, so they want to play it safe as much as possible. And then the second category, the reckless ones. They don't fully appreciate the value of life. They keep challenging the fear of death until they lose the life that they have. And then the third category, the overindulgent crowd, not yet grasp the real purpose of life. And because of that, they think that the real purpose is to get while you can, to enjoy while you can, overindulge while you can. So only the last 1% out of 10 can see the great circle of life and death that you saw in the first slide of the recap, the realization that naturally leads to Tao cultivation and leads to no fear of death. This is why last time I brought up Zhuangzi as the illustrating story from the Tao of Happiness. The Tao of Happiness is my first book about this great philosopher, Zhuangzi. It will not be the last. It was the first, and I wanted to make the first the most representative of all of his work. And the most important thing that Zhuangzi was known for was his views on life and death. It's a big deal in the Tao philosophy. Zhuangzi was the one who was able to express it in the form of stories. So through him, we know that this was definitely the way that the ancient sages thought about death. This is not something that we're retroactively making up for them. From his stories, he's making it as clear as possible. And the way that he explained death in the book of Zhuangzi, I would say it really is the best. Zhuangzi, the great sage, told his stories with the most clarity, the greatest intelligence, made his points. And that's why that story about his wife passing away is often paired with chapter 50 as a way to explain. And when you read up on his other views about life and death, which in the book of Happiness is all in the very last section, you begin to master this Tao, you begin to see your purpose in life. You walk your path in this life with intent, which alone is very powerful. You radiate this inner authentic joy that if you come across an authentic sage in real life, you will sense it is unmistakable, something that radiates out of them. And finally, just to repeat, you are liberated from fear. You can fully embrace life because you fully understand and accept the reality of death. So that, in a nutshell, was what we talked about in our last meeting, and it set us up to be ready to talk about the paraphrase for chapter 50. When we do a paraphrase, we're trying to say what Lao Tzu was trying to say using our own words, expressing the original meaning with modern language. So here's what the chapter looks like, broken up into two halves as before, with a question and answer at the very end of it. So we'll do the paraphrase in two halves as well, starting with the first half. The first half describes the first three categories that you saw in that previous slide. Category 1, Category 2, and 3, followers of life, followers of death, those whose lives are moved toward death, respectively. All 3 and 10 for a total of 9. How can we say that with modern language to make it clear and easy to understand? Here's what I would like to suggest. As sentient beings transition from birth to death and back again, they approach life and death in very different ways. Some of them seek longevity by playing it safe in everything they do, while others seek thrills by taking risks as if they have a death wish. Furthermore, there are also those who want to live as much as possible but end up speeding their way toward death. Why? Because they go overboard in trying to enjoy life to the utmost and suffer the consequences of overindulgence. So that, in modern language, is what Lao Tzu was trying to convey with the 3 categories. So then let's take a look at the second half as well. We're about to explore the final category, category number 4, which is 1 person out of 10, and described by Lao Tzu as those who are good at cultivating life. This particular section has a lot of metaphorical symbology, and we're going to revisit those symbols again when we do the full circle discussion. For now, though, it is basically all trying to say that the final category are the ones who are free from the fear of death. So here's the way that I would try to say the same thing with modern language. Relatively few people, about 1 in 10, truly understand how to live in alignment with the Tao. When they travel on the road of life, they do not come across wild animals. When they enter into the arena of social competition, they are not injured by weapons. Criticisms as sharp as rhino horns, rumors as vicious as tiger claws, and personal attacks like the blades of soldiers are all useless against them. Why? Because they understand the true nature of life and death. As Tao cultivators, they are liberated from the fear of death, and this in turn means they have no weakness for others to exploit. So there you have the paraphrase, sort of a synopsis for chapter 50. So I think that it sticks to the original in terms of expression. the paraphrase still leaves room for one to look into the metaphors to understand exactly what the original author, Lao Tzu, was trying to get at. And we can come at a better understanding by having a full circle discussion. We do this as the very last part of our discussion in the chapter, when we take the very end and connect it back to the beginning to gain additional insights, to really get the essence of the Tao. In this particular case, for chapter 50, in the very last lines of Tao Te Ching chapter 50, Lao Tzu talks about having no place for death. In other words, living without the fear of death, being liberated from fear. And that's what you see here on the right-hand side at the very bottom. Having no place for death is what the last line here says. That's at the very end of this chapter. Then we connect this back to the beginning. The beginning talks about coming into life, entering into death, a description of the great circle. This relates to the concept of the great circle of life and death, in that we link it back down to form that full circle. And then what we can do is we can see that this brings out an overall message. Namely, that when you do not understand the true nature of existence, fear compels you to grasp onto life. It's literally a death grip. You have a death grip on life, kind of a paradox. But when you fully understand life and death, you experience spiritual liberation from fear. You're able to relax the death grip, release the grasp, and the result is liberating. And I can describe it by juxtaposing fear. Here's the zone of fear. When we talk about the rhinos, tigers, and soldiers in the second half of chapter 50, we know that these are all metaphors. They're not literally talking about, the wild animals, rhinos and tigers, soldiers, etc. They're all talking about fear, and it is because, as we all know, fear may paralyze you or cause panic. So in life, when you do suffer from fear, it can be a paralysis in the sense that it keeps you from doing anything worthwhile or meaningful. It can cause a panic reaction, which is the reason why there are some people who are followers of death or people who overindulge. So instead of fear, the goal in Tao cultivation is to be free. In the zone of freedom, having no place for death means you realize there's no point in letting the fear of death occupy your mind. Why would you let the fear of death stay in your mind, taking up residence rent-free? Rhinos, tigers, and soldiers, the symbology of fear, the fear of death, they all lose their ability to harm you once you have no place for death. So in Tao cultivation, we transition from these two states. It is always easier to go toward freedom when you can see the terrain clearly. So that's why I have that arrow in between the two. Without guidance, without clarity, people may still go back and forth between the two different states. The state of fear, the state of freedom. Freedom meaning spiritual liberation. With clarity, I think it's easier to see when you are trapped. in the fear, and that you have to then transition to being free. And this is why this chapter is the life and death chapter. It's that important. So to wrap it up, I want to just remind everyone of a quote. Fear is the mind killer. This quote from a novel, which will become a movie soon. I want to just focus on the meaning by itself. Fear is the mind killer in the sense that fear drives out rationality, reason, logic. Fear makes you do things that you will regret later on. The Tao is not about the fear that drives you into a blind panic, the fear that kills your mind. The Tao is about the ultimate freedom. So I want to leave you with that as we conclude chapter 50 of the Tao Te Ching. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.